Welcome back. In this installment, we're looking at pages 39 through 41. It's just a couple of simple projects. There's no reading, no, no primary source reading. It's just an exercise. And it's an interesting exercise in that when I first started teaching world history, I taught this material and put the information up on the board. And then when I would test students about it, or when the information from this material came up on the test, I noticed the students were really not getting it. So I added this simple chart for them to fill out for themselves. And even though it's very mechanical, it's repetitive, it's extremely simple, and students just use their calculators and just work through it, the comprehension and retention of this information multiplied by several times. It's remarkable how much better, how much more efficiently a person learns something by doing rather than simply by hearing or watching or trying to memorize, or even memorizing, writing down, and trying to repeat. If they do it, it's incredible, and there's no work in the workbook or in the whole semester, I think, that demonstrates that more effectively than this project. The project, like I said, is quite simple. The function of it is to demonstrate that it's impossible for humans to not be related. Whereas the Blombos Cave is a description of the archaeology and the evidence that we have that shows that humans all come from a common source. This one looks backwards. It begins with a person constructing a family tree, and it shows through this project, the paradox of genealogy, that one person's genealogy needs to include essentially everybody. It's not truly a paradox. It's not a true paradox. It's the impression of a paradox, or it appears to be a paradox, on page 41. And generations back I've provided, so you see this in the left-hand column. Years ago and number of years back and a date is simply for reference, and those are obviously going to be correct. Not every generation will be 25 years exactly, with generations being measured as the age of a woman when she first delivers, I suppose, as that's a generation. Historically, generations are much less than 25. In the modern world, more than 25. I think in the United States, an average generation is 27 or 28, maybe even a little bit older for that, a little longer than that. But historically, it's 18 or 19, something quite low. So these numbers are generalized and rounded out to 25, and so the numbers and the dates are simple. So it's the right-hand column that's significant, and that students really need to pay attention to. The right-hand column presumes that every person alive has two parents, and each of those two parents has two parents, and each of those two parents has two parents, which is a kind of a conventional family tree. A person shows the descendant, the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, and the numbers multiply. But that can't really happen. It's not possible that we can really have that many ancestors. In fact, for most people in the world, I think it's extremely unlikely that most people have that many great-great-grandparents, as the chart would show. So the chart starts with two parents, and then at the second generation, it's four direct line ancestors. We're only counting direct line ancestors here, not uncles or cousins or siblings or anything else. Then 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on. Go 10 generations back, it shows that we have 1,024. Each of us, the person who's doing the chart, has 1,024 direct line ancestors. That means grandparents means parents and grandparents. For a lot of people, that doesn't seem like a large number. That number seems okay when we get to 10. In the past, I've asked students, is that a large number? Does that seem, or not? I don't suggest it's large. I just ask if the number seems reasonable. And students will usually say, sure, why not? I have 1,000 great-great-grandparents in the year 1750. What do I know? That's okay. But then go down another 10 to 20, and it's 1,048,000. Well, now in 1525, that's getting to be an awful lot of David Hertzels in that time. But still, some students are reluctant because they don't see the problem with it, and they know that the next question, if they say that there's a problem with it, the next question will be, what is the problem? And they don't want to answer that because they don't know the answer. And it's even though the answer really is provided on page 43, they usually don't know it yet when we do this project in class. So head on down to 30 generations back, the year would be 1250, and the number of direct line ancestors has now reached the population of the entire world. And then 32, it becomes greater than the population of the world in the year 1200. And if this were a couple of generations longer, this chart, it would reach a number quite quickly that would exceed the total number of people who have ever lived in the world. And the solution to it is described on page 43, and the solution to it is that people don't have that people have that many lines. So they have that many genealogical lines, but not that many people, because people are counted twice. So if cousins marry, which cousins do, and since everybody's cousins, then every marriage involves cousins of some degree. And when cousins marry, at some point their lineage intersects, and so then they're counting ancestors more than once. And I think with first cousins, it's as early as great grandparents. The child of first cousins, I believe, will duplicate great grandparents. But you can see that this number has to reduce quite quickly, and it needs to reduce a lot, and it needs to be shaped the other direction. Like, it can't continue to get larger, it has to get smaller and smaller in order to match what we know about human population history. So the solution is that humans are much more closely related than maybe sometimes people would like to admit. And that reduces the number. It reduces the number quite quickly if people will admit that they are the children of cousins. Maybe it's second cousins. I think in most states in the United States, it's legal for second cousins to marry. In some states in the United States, it's legal for first cousins to marry. But historically, it's not unusual for cousins to marry. And it's first cousins to marry. And obviously, since all people are cousins, if people are fifth cousins, then they only need to go back 5 more generations before their ancestors begin to intersect. And then, since this happens with everybody, then that funnel gets put right back up instead of the upside down. This is not a genealogical project. It's a mathematical project. It's mostly mathematicians who have worked on this kind of material and have concluded that the key is a most recent common ancestor, and they've worked out the likelihood that all humans have a most recent common ancestor within the past couple thousand years, and the likelihood is very high. That continentally, all people who have any ancestors from any one continent will have a single common ancestor with everybody on that continent, or everybody from that continent who also has an ancestor on that continent within 1,000 years or 1,200 years or something like that. The number is already being reduced from this perspective. But then those continents are also intersected. Human migrations are fluid. People are migrating in all kinds of ways, by accident, by war, by necessity, for following food, following the fish. all of these things. Then, so I usually teach this particular class as a riddle. I let them try to work it out, and sooner or later one person will say something about commonly about incest, and I'll say, well, not necessarily incest, but what does that suggest? And eventually they will, with a little coaching, the students will work this out on their own, and then they don't forget it. They remember that they're cousins, and they don't always love to be the cousins of everybody in the room, and my cousin also. Sorry. Project 8 then asks them to summarize the paradox itself, which is not exactly a paragraph, explain the solution, and then describe the implications of that for modern concepts of race. And obviously what this project shows is that race is a cultural construct. It's a perception. It's not a scientific fact. A nice thing about this project is that it is scientific. It's mathematical, it's scientific, it's objective. So a lot of them have heard we're all related. They've heard it in popular culture. They've heard it in common parlance that we're all brothers and sisters, or we're all under the same God, or something like that. Well, it's actually factually true. The same will be true of what's to come, that in the same way that humans, we're not the same person, we're not all the same person, but we're all related, and so we're the same people. This will also be true of the other subjects in this chapter, language, myth, and so on. They're not exactly the same myths, but they're all related. All right, I'll see you next time.